The most revolutionary people in history were all labeled difficult by those in power, and thank goodness they were. Every time you silence yourself to avoid that label, you're surrendering your power to change the world. You're choosing comfort over impact, acceptance over authenticity, fitting in over standing out. And while that might make your life easier in the moment, it's making our collective future smaller. The next time someone calls you difficult, don't apologize. Don't shrink. Don't try to smooth things over. Instead, look them directly in the eyes and say, "Thank you for noticing that I refuse to compromise what matters most." Difficult. That word has followed me throughout my life. Perhaps it's followed you too. You're being difficult. Why do you always have to make things so difficult? You're such a difficult person to deal with. For the longest time, I believed this was something to be ashamed of. Something I needed to fix about myself. I'd apologize for it. I'd try to make myself smaller, more agreeable, less difficult. But what if I told you that being called difficult might be the greatest compliment you could ever receive? What if I told you that the very qualities that make you difficult in the eyes of others are the same qualities that will lead you to your greatest achievements and deepest fulfillment? That's what we're going to explore together today. Not as speaker and audience, but as fellow travelers on this journey of life, each of us learning, growing, evolving in our own unique ways. When someone calls you difficult, what they're often really saying is that you're not conforming to my expectations. You're not fitting into the box I've created for you. You're not making my life easier by simply going along with what I want. And isn't that beautiful? Isn't it magnificent that you are complex enough, authentic enough, and courageous enough to stand in your truth even when it makes others uncomfortable? The most transformative, revolutionary, and impactful people throughout history have all been labeled as difficult at some point. They questioned assumptions. They challenged the status quo. They refused to accept limitations placed upon them by... They didn't just go with the flow. They redirected the entire river. And yes, that made them difficult, but it also made them extraordinary. Have you ever known anyone who achieved something truly remarkable by always being easy, by never challenging anything, by simply agreeing with whatever was asked of them? The path of least resistance rarely leads to greatness. It leads to mediocrity. It leads to a life half-lived. It leads to deathbed regrets. I want to share something with you that changed my perspective forever. I was in a meeting where important decisions were being made, decisions that would affect many people's lives. The room was filled with brilliant minds, yet everyone seemed to be nodding along with the leader's proposal, despite obvious flaws. I raised my hand and voiced my concerns. I suggested alternatives. I questioned assumptions. I challenged the data. After the meeting, a colleague approached me and said, "That was really difficult of you. You made everyone uncomfortable." I felt that familiar shame wash over me. That sense that I had done something wrong, that I should have just kept quiet and gone along with things. But then she continued, "Thank goodness someone had the courage to speak up. You just saved us from making a terrible mistake." That moment, I realized something profound. My difficulty wasn't a character flaw. It was a gift not just to myself, but to everyone around me. When you're willing to be difficult, to speak your truth, to ask the hard questions, to challenge assumptions, to stand firm in your values, even when it would be easier to compromise. You're not just serving yourself. You're serving the highest good of all concerned. Now, let me be clear about something. Being difficult isn't about being obstinate for the sake of it. It's not about being contrarian just to get attention. It's not about being unkind or disrespectful. True difficulty, the kind we're talking about today, comes from a place of integrity, authenticity, and courage. It comes from caring so deeply about truth and quality and possibility that you're willing to endure the discomfort of standing apart from the crowd. When was the last time you were called difficult? What were the circumstances? Were you standing up for something you believed in? Were you refusing to compromise your values? Were you pushing for excellence when others were settling for good enough? If so, I want you to consider reframing that experience. Rather than seeing it as a failure to get along, see it as a success in staying true to yourself and your highest values. Let's explore some of the qualities that often get people labeled as difficult, and why these qualities are actually tremendous assets. First, there's the quality of discernment. Difficult people tend to have high standards. They don't automatically accept things at face value. They evaluate, they assess, they consider deeply. In a world that moves at an ever-accelerating pace, where we're bombarded with information and expected to make split-second decisions, this quality of discernment is precious. It's what protects us from manipulation. It's what helps us make wise choices, rather than merely expedient ones. Yes, it can be frustrating to others when you don't immediately jump on board with their ideas or plans. Yes, it can slow things down when you insist on asking questions and gathering more information before making a decision. But isn't that preferable to the alternative? To rushing headlong into mistakes that could have been avoided with a bit more careful consideration? Your discernment isn't a burden. It's a blessing. It's a light in the darkness, helping to illuminate the path forward, not just for yourself, but for everyone who travels with you. Then there's the quality of authenticity. Difficult people often refuse to pretend. They won't say they agree when they don't. They won't say they're fine when they're hurting. They won't say something is working when it clearly isn't. In a culture that often values politeness over honesty and conformity over authenticity, this quality can be profoundly disruptive, but it's also profoundly necessary. Think about the relationships in your life that matter most deeply to you. Aren't they the ones where you can be fully yourself, where you don't have to pretend or perform, where you can speak your truth and know that it will be received with respect, even if not always with agreement? That kind of relationship is only possible when we have the courage to be authentic, to show up as who we truly are rather than who we think others want us to be. Your authenticity isn't something to be ashamed of. It's something to be celebrated. It's the gift you bring to every room you enter, every conversation you join, every relationship you nurture. And then there's the quality of courage. Difficult people are willing to endure discomfort, both their own and others' in service of something larger than momentary ease. It takes courage to speak up when everyone else is silent. It takes courage to stand firm when you're being pressured to give way. It takes courage to follow your own path when everyone around you seems to be heading in a different direction. This courage isn't about being fearless. It's about feeling the fear and choosing to act anyway, because what you're standing for matters more than the discomfort of the moment. Your courage isn't a liability. It's a force for positive change in the world. It's what makes growth possible, both for yourself and for the communities you're part of. Now, I want to address something important. Some of you might be thinking, but I don't want to be difficult. I want people to like me. I want to get along with others. I want to have harmonious relationships. These are beautiful desires, and they come from the very human need for connection and belonging. There's nothing wrong with wanting to be liked and to have peaceful relationships. The deepest, most meaningful connections don't come from making yourself smaller, from hiding your truth, from compromising your values to avoid rocking the boat. They come from being fully, authentically yourself and allowing others the space to do the same. True harmony isn't about absence of disagreement. It's about creating environments where disagreement can exist alongside respect and care for one another, where different perspectives aren't just tolerated but valued as opportunities for growth and learning. When you have the courage to be difficult, to speak your truth, to stand in your values, to challenge what needs challenging, you create the possibility for relationships based on authenticity rather than pretense. And those are the relationships that nourish the soul. I remember a conversation with a dear friend who was going through a difficult time. She was making choices that I could see were causing her pain, and I was faced with a decision. Do I say the easy thing, the comforting thing, the thing that won't disrupt our family? Or do I say the difficult thing, the challenging thing, the thing that might create temporary discomfort, but could potentially help her see a different path? I chose the difficult path. I spoke my truth with as much kindness and compassion as I could muster. And yes, there was tension. Yes, there were tears. Yes, there was discomfort. But on the other side of that discomfort was a deeper connection than we'd ever experienced before. Because in that moment, she knew that my loyalty wasn't just to her feelings in the moment, but to her highest good, that I cared enough to risk our friendship to help her find her way back to herself. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do is to be difficult, to not take the easy way out, to care more about truth and growth than about comfort and ease. This is true not just in our personal relationships, but in our communities, our workplaces, our progress doesn't come from everyone politely agreeing with one another. It comes from the friction of different perspectives, from the challenging of assumptions, from the questioning of the way things have always been done. Think about any significant positive change in history. Did it happen because everyone was easy and agreeable, or did it happen because someone or many someones had the courage to be difficult? Being difficult in the way we're discussing today is an act of service. It's a gift you give to the world, especially when that gift isn't immediately recognized or appreciated. So the next time someone calls you difficult, I want you to pause before you feel that familiar shame or embarrassment. I want you to consider that perhaps they've just paid you the highest compliment. Perhaps they've recognized in you the courage to stand in your truth, the integrity to not compromise your values, the discernment to not accept less than what's possible, the authenticity to show up as who you truly are, not who others expect you to be. And isn't that beautiful? Now let's dig a bit deeper, because being difficult in the way I'm describing, being difficult as an expression of your highest self rather than your lowest, requires certain inner resources. It requires a foundation of self-knowledge, self-trust, and self-compassion. Without self-knowledge, it's easy to confuse being difficult with being defensive, to mistake our triggered reactions for principled stands, to fight battles that are more about our own unhealed wounds than about what's truly important. The journey of self-knowledge is ongoing. It never ends. It's about continuously turning inward with curiosity and compassion, asking ourselves the hard questions, being willing to see the truth of who we are, both our magnificence and our messiness. What are your core values? What matters most deeply to you? What are the non-negotiables in your life? What are the wounds that still trigger reactive behaviors in you? What are the fears that sometimes drive your decisions? The more clearly you can answer these questions, the more your difficulty will come from a place of conscious choice rather than unconscious reaction. Then there's self-trust. Many of us have been conditioned to doubt ourselves, to look outside ourselves for validation and direction. We've been taught that others know better than we do what's right for us, what's true for us, what's possible for us. But deep down, beneath all that conditioning, there's a part of you that knows, that has always known, that inner compass that points you toward your true north, even when the landscape around you is confusing and the path forward isn't clear. Learning to trust that inner knowing is one of the most important journeys you'll ever undertake. It's about tuning out the noise of others' expectations and opinions long enough to hear the quiet voice of your own wisdom. And it's about having the courage to follow that voice, even when it leads you in a direction that others might not understand or approve of. Self-trust doesn't mean thinking you're always right, or that you have nothing to learn from others. It means knowing that you have the wisdom and resources within you to navigate your life, to make mistakes and learn from them, to course correct when necessary, to find your way back to yourself when you get lost. And finally, there's self-compassion. Being difficult in the way we're discussing today isn't easy. It often means standing alone. It means enduring criticism and misunderstanding. It means feeling the discomfort of conflict or tension without running away. That's why self-compassion is so essential. It's what allows you to hold yourself with kindness when you're in those difficult moments, to acknowledge your own humanity, your own vulnerability, your own need for care and tenderness. Without self-compassion, being difficult can become brittle and harsh, both toward yourself and toward others. With self-compassion, being difficult becomes an act of love, a fierce, protective love for what matters most. So as you practice the courage to be difficult, to speak your truth, to stand in your values, to challenge what needs challenging, remember to also practice kindness toward yourself in the process. Now, I want to address a question that might be arising for some of you. How do I know when being difficult is coming from my highest self versus my ego or my wounds? This is such an important question because not all difficulty is created equal. There's a world of difference between being difficult because you're standing in your integrity and being difficult because you're acting from unhealed parts of yourself. Here are some reflections that might help you discern the difference. When you're being difficult from your highest self, there's typically a sense of clarity and calm beneath any surface nervousness. You know why you're taking the stand you're taking. You can articulate your reasoning without becoming defensive. You're open to dialogue and to having your mind changed if compelling new information emerges. When you're being difficult from ego or woundedness, there's often a quality of rigidity, a need to be right, a sense of threat if others disagree, a conflation of your perspective with your identity so that any challenge to your viewpoint feels like an attack on your very self. When you're being difficult from your highest self, you remain connected to your care for others, even those you're in conflict with. You're not trying to win or defeat them. You're trying to arrive at what's true, what's helpful, what serves the highest good. When you're being difficult from ego or woundedness, there's often a disconnection from empathy, an us versus them mentality, a focus on proving yourself right rather than on finding what's true. When you're being difficult from your highest self, there's a willingness to look at your own blind spots and biases, to consider that you might be missing something important, to stay humble even as you stand firm. When you're being difficult from ego or woundedness, there's often a refusal to examine your own part in the dynamic, a blaming of others, a certainty that you see the whole picture while others are missing it. We all have moments of both types of difficulty. We're human, we get triggered, we react from our wounds, we get caught in ego. The key is not to strive for perfection, but for awareness, to cultivate the ability to notice when you've slipped from principled difficulty into reactive difficulty, and to have the humility to course correct when that happens. Because here's the truth. The kind of difficulty that changes the world for the better, that elevates conversations, that catalyzes growth. That kind of difficulty comes not from woundedness, but not from fear, but from love. Not from separation, but from connection. It comes from the part of you that can hold both your truth and others with equal care. That can stand firm in your values while remaining open to learning and growth. That can challenge what needs challenging while still honoring the humanity of everyone involved. That's the kind of difficulty I'm inviting you to embrace today. Not as a weapon, but as a gift. Not as a wall to separate you from others, but as a bridge to deeper, more authentic connection, because the world needs your voice. It needs your perspective. It needs your courage to speak up when something isn't right, to question what needs questioning, to challenge what needs challenging. The world needs you to be difficult in all the most beautiful ways. So the next time someone calls you difficult, I hope you'll smile and say thank you. I take that as the highest compliment, because it means you're not just going along to get along. It means you're not just taking the path of least resistance. It means you're living from a place of authenticity, integrity, and courage. And in a world that often encourages us to be less than we are, to be smaller, quieter, more compliant, the decision to be fully yourself, to speak your truth, to stand in your values, that's not just difficult, that's revolutionary. Let me share something with you that might shift your perspective even further. Have you ever considered that when someone calls you difficult, they might actually be expressing their own limitations rather than yours? Think about it this way. When someone finds you difficult, what they're really saying is that they don't have the capacity in that moment to engage with your complexity, your depth, your fullness. And that's not your shortcoming. It's theirs. This doesn't mean we should judge them harshly for it. We all have our limitations, our blind spots, our areas of growth, but it does mean that you don't need to make yourself smaller, simpler, easier to accommodate those limitations. I once heard a beautiful metaphor that has stayed with me. Imagine yourself as a vast, deep ocean. You contain multitudes. You have sun-dappled surfaces and mysterious depths. You have gentle waves and powerful currents. You have areas of calm and areas of turbulence. Now imagine someone approaching your shoreline with a teacup. They dip their cup into your waters and then complain. This ocean is too vast. It's too deep. It's too unpredictable. It's too, would you use the ocean? Feel that you needed to become less vast, less deep, less diverse to accommodate their teacup? Of course not. you would understand that the limitation is in the vessel they're bringing to you, not in your nature as an ocean. The same is true in our human relationships. When someone finds you difficult, consider that perhaps they're approaching you with a teacup when your truth, your complexity, your authentic self requires something more expansive. This perspective frees you from the need to apologize for your depth, your complexity, your fullness. It allows you to hold compassion for those who find you difficult while still honoring the truth of who you are. And it reminds you that there are others out there who will approach you not with teacups, but with vessels capacious enough to receive all of who you are. Your challenges along with your gifts, your questions along with your certainties, your difficulties along with your easiness. Those are your people. Those are the ones with whom you can experience the joy of being fully seen, fully heard, fully valued, not despite your difficulty, but inclusive of it as an integral part of the magnificent whole that is. Now, I want to be clear about something. Embracing your difficulty, your willingness to speak truth, to challenge assumptions, to stand in your values doesn't mean becoming callous to the impact you have on others. In fact, it means becoming more aware, more intentional, more compassionate about how you express your truth. Being difficult in the way I'm describing isn't about being harsh or unkind. It's not about bulldozing over others' feelings or perspectives. It's not about being right at all costs. It's about holding your truth with both courage and compassion. It's about understanding that how you express your difficulty matters just as much as your willingness to express it at all. You can be both difficult and kind. You can be both challenging and respectful. You can be both unwilling to compromise on your core values and deeply considerate of others' humanity. In fact, I would argue that the most powerful form of difficulty comes wrapped in kindness. It comes from a place of such deep care for truth, for growth, for possibility, that it cannot help but honor the humanity of everyone involved, even those with whom you're in conflict. Think about the people who have challenged you most meaningfully in your life. The ones who pushed you to grow, to reconsider your assumptions, to become more than you thought possible. Were they the ones who bulldozed over you with their certainty? Who made you feel small or stupid for not seeing what they saw? Who cared more about being right than about, or were they the ones who challenged you with such evident care for you that you couldn't help but open yourself to what they were offering? Who created enough safety that you could let down your defenses and truly consider a new perspective? Who held you in such high regard that they refused to collude with your limitations? I'm guessing it was the latter, because true transformation happens not when we're shamed or bulldozed, but when we're simultaneously challenged and cherished. When we feel safe enough to be vulnerable, to not know, to learn and grow. So as you embrace your difficulty, your truth speaking, your standard upholding, your assumption questioning self, remember that how you express these qualities matters deeply. It matters not just for how others receive you, but for your own integrity, for your own capacity to look in the mirror and know that you've acted from your highest self rather than your wounded self, that you've been difficult in service of growth and truth, rather than in service of your ego's need to be right or superior. This is the ongoing practice, to hold both courage and compassion, both truth and tenderness, both difficulty and care. It's not always easy. There will be times when you get it wrong, when your difficulty comes out harshly, when you prioritize being right over being kind, when you forget to hold others' humanity alongside your truth. That's part of being human. The key is not perfection, but growth. Not getting it right every time, but learning each time you get it wrong. The more you practice holding both courage and compassion, the more natural it becomes. The more you discover that they're not opposing forces, but complementary ones. That your compassion actually fuels your courage, and your courage creates space for deeper compassion. This integration of courage and compassion, of difficulty and kindness, is what allows you to be a force for positive change in the world, in your relationships, your communities, your workplaces, and beyond. Because the world doesn't need more people who are difficult in destructive ways. We have plenty of those. People whose difficulty comes from insecurity, from a need to be right, from a desire to dominate or control others. What the world desperately needs is people who are difficult in constructive ways. People whose difficulty comes from a place of such deep care for truth and possibility that they're willing to endure discomfort, both their own and others, on service of something larger than momentary ease. People who are willing to say, I see a different possibility here when everyone else has settled for the status quo. People who are willing to ask, but is this really working? When everyone else is pretending that it is. People who are willing to stand firm in their values, even when it would be easier to compromise. People who are willing to speak truth to power, to question authority, to challenge systems that are causing harm. People who are willing to be difficult, not for difficulty's sake, but for the sake of creating a world that better reflects our highest values and possibilities. That's the kind of difficulty that changes lives, that transforms communities, that heals wounds both personal and collective. And that's the kind of difficulty I'm inviting you to embrace, not as a burden to be ashamed of, but as a gift to be celebrated and cultivated. Because in a world that often encourages us to silence our voices, to dim our light, to make ourselves smaller and more manageable, your willingness to be difficult, to be fully, authentically, courageously yourself, is not just an act of, it's an act of service to everyone whose lives you touch. When you have the courage to be difficult in the ways we've been discussing, you give others permission to do the same. You create a ripple effect of authenticity, courage, and truth-speaking that extends far beyond your immediate circle. You become a living invitation to others to step into their own fullness, to speak their own truth, to stand in their own values, even when it's difficult. And in doing so, you help to create a world where we don't have to choose between belonging and authenticity, where we don't have to silence our truth in order to be accepted, where we can be both connected to others and true to ourselves. That's a world worth being difficult for. So the next time you find yourself holding back your truth for fear of being seen as difficult, I hope you'll remember this conversation. I hope you'll remember that your difficulty, your unwillingness to settle, to pretend, to go along with what doesn't feel right to you, is not a character flaw to be overcome. It's a precious gift to be honored and expressed with both courage and compassion. A gift not just to yourself, but to everyone whose life you touch. A gift that the world desperately needs right now. So please, be difficult. Be gloriously, magnificently, beautifully difficult. And know that in doing so, you're not just honoring your own truth and integrity. You're helping to create a world where authenticity is valued over conformity, where truth is valued over comfort, where the difficult path of integrity is recognized as the one most worth taking. A world where being called difficult is, indeed, the highest compliment. Thank you for your courage. Thank you for your authenticity. Thank you for your willingness to be difficult in all the ways that matter most. The world is better because of it, and so are you.